All right, Nostalgia Trappers, welcome to the program. David Parsons here. Hope you are doing well, coasting into the Christmas season now. We want to talk about Christmas on Nostalgia Trap because I don't think there is a deeper or more powerful nostalgia trap in American life than the Christmas season. And so I wanted to talk to one of our absolute favorites, Yasmin Nair, this week about Christmas and nostalgia and the sort of nightmarish social politics of Christmas and the weird sort of conflicted feeling that especially people on the left feel about this season, which is deeply associated with American imperialism and Christianity and all this nasty shit we allegedly hate. And yet, as I talk about with Yasmin in this episode, a tear comes to my eye often when I hear some of these really sentimental Christmas songs. So what the fuck is that all about? We wanted to talk about this film, The Apartment, as well, which is sort of a question whether or not it's a quote-unquote Christmas movie. But The Apartment is a Billy Wilder-directed film. It came out in 1960, stars Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. I'm sure many of you have seen it. If you haven't, check it out. Because we talk about it in detail in this episode and sort of try to connect it to these wider ideas of family and sexuality and Christmas. And I think we had a really, really fun time. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you haven't checked out our Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. We really appreciate our supporters because they are our only source of income for all the work we do on this show. And you get access to lots of bonus episodes and other stuff like our movie club, which just watched a Billy Wilder film, actually, Ace in the Hole. If you haven't seen Ace in the Hole, that is a fucking crazy movie, and we had a really fun time talking about it. If you want to join up, our next movie club meeting will be in January. Thanks again to all our subscribers. Patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. All right, let's get going with our Christmas episode. Here is me and Yasmin Nair talking about Christmas nostalgia and Billy Wilder's 1960 film, The Apartment. All right, Yasmin, we've been talking about Christmas offline, you and I. The holiday is upon us. I can hear the bells. I can hear the music. I really don't know. I'll just say up front, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I think you are the queen in many ways of unpacking the contradictions, for me at least, and I know for a lot of other people as well. And the thing for me is that Christmas is a huge contradiction because I do love it and hate it, and both of those feelings are very powerfully present in me. What is your sort of experience with Christmas? Was Christmas, since you grew up outside of the United States? What was Christmas to you as a kid?
I grew up outside the United States, but I grew up in what was then Calcutta and what is now Kolkata, and which was the original, sort of one of the original outposts of the British Empire. So actually, Christmas, especially if you were, as I was growing up, not right now, people, but growing up, if you were part of the upper classes and you had, you and your family had enough money, Christmas was a lovely time. The thing is, everyone in Calcutta celebrated Christmas. And Calcutta, like much of India, is filled with festivals. Like there's an entire month of October, for instance, which is devoted to pujas it's called, it's puja month. And so and I went to an Anglican school, La Martiniere. So there were holidays for every festival and every religion imaginable. And Christmas was a big deal. And, my parents would give me Christmas presents, et cetera, et cetera. So there were lots of fake trees, etc., in Newmarket, which at the time was the big, large supermarket area, etc. But not supermarket. It was more like a gigantic mall, really. Sort of an indoor mall. It's very famous. It's called Newmarket, and in Newmarket was Nahum's, which was an ancient, I think it's over like a couple of 100 years old almost. There are articles about it. It's Nahoum''S, which is a Jewish bakery. And it was renowned for its Christmas fruitcake.
Yeah.
When your people are wondering, you do what you have to do to survive. But Nahom's is a famous bakery that exists even now. And it was, Jewish bakery known for its Christmas cake, etc.
So you don't have to accept Jesus Christ into your heart in order to celebrate Christmas. I think that's part of like a big part of it, right? Is that like exactly. It seems as the further we get along, the less, and maybe that's part of why right-wing people like are so upset about, they feel like Christmas is going away, even though Christmas is like as present unavoidable, honestly.
Completely unavoidable in all parts of the world, and people are like, oh, hey, it's Christmas. Would you like a gift? Yes, thank you. It was great. You got gifts.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, nice. How, because I think that a lot of people say like Christmas is for kids, right? Like it's something for the children. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think that adults are protesting too much because they need it too. But Christmas as a kid is a different experience than it is as an adult. And like
this is true.
Yeah. And Christmas to me as a kid was very exciting and fun. I didn't really have much like criticism of it at all. I wondered how it was though in India with Christmas having this particular, like, I don't know, Anglo spin on it, if that makes sense. How much is that a part of the conversation?
Well, the thing is, Chicago, Calcutta is a very Anglophilic city in many ways. It was part of the empire, and it's still, like, I think now all the street names have been changed. Yet Harrington, Clark Street, all of those names have been changed, perhaps Indian names, etc. Wellesley, blah blah blah. But it's never, and Calcutta has always been, to its credit, it's a very literary city, and it's a very, very, if I may say so, in many ways, it's a very cosmopolitan city in many ways. The fact that it has, for instance, it has had a long tradition of an older Jewish community, a Parsi community. Armenians, some of the last Armenians in India actually have formed a community. Now, sadly, a lot of those communities are shrinking for various reasons, but it's always been very cosmopolitan from the outset in that sense. And again, I do want to, of course, clearly, as Calcutta is also a city of incredible poverty. So who gets to enjoy that cosmopolitanism? Who gets to enjoy the Christmas cake, right? Yeah. Is very much dependent upon, where you are in the social, economic scale. But its ethos is, it's home to one of the biggest book fairs in Asia, etc. So its ethos is very much about understanding the world and appreciating the world in its complexity. So that was never a problem. Now, I think even today, actually, Calcutta is in West Bengal, and it's a state which is as I know, I think it is still ruled by communists, and also it still is resolutely standing against the Narendra Modi narrative. So there is that, again, in complicated ways. But Calcutta has always been a weird, interesting city in that sense. One of the big landmarks is Victoria Memorial, which is literally a memorial to Queen Victoria. And we love it.
I hadn't even thought of that perspective as much, but now I'm thinking about like Christmas. There's a lot of I don't know. It feels like Christmas is an engine for carrying imperial sort of ideas around the world. Yeah. And it's funny because I always associate that with America. So it's like, oh, America is enforcing Christmas around the world. But I guess it's really just like Western, the Western white world is that's their holiday. But it's something that true. Like, I think
sorry, if I may just interrupt that though, just to say that also, it's also important to remember that for better or for worse, there's also there are many Christians as well in India, and especially in Calcutta. So I went to a Christian school,
and then
sense.
I
went to a Jesuit.
It's not the Christmas, it's the Christianity.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I went to a Jesuit school, St. Xavier's, Calcutta. So so a lot of us again, So there's my parents are from Kerala, where there's a massive Christian population, Catholic Christian population. Right. Also an older Jewish population in Calcutta, in Kerala and in Calcutta. So there are those complexities of how religions move back and forth. And of course, the very troubling, missionary shit. Mother Teresa is from Calcutta, and she was, as Christopher, what's his name?
Hitchens.
Thank you. As Hitchens wrote in a book that I'm having a hard time finding, by the way. print copies seem to be few and far between. Yeah, as he wrote, she was actually absolutely monstrous. But yeah, so it's complicated in that sense. But no, I completely agree with you. Yes, about colonization and the brutality of American Christmas, though, is really interesting. It's like I had never experienced Christmas that way until I came here, and I thought, well, because Christmas for me was like this warm, fuzzy thing that, some of my Christian friends celebrated and we all did, blah, blah, blah. And then I came here and it's like this weird, very commercial, yes, but also violent.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you mean? I love that phrase, the brutality of American Christmas. That sounds like a title of one of your pieces, but I'm thinking like, what is the brutality? Because that's part of something that I think as I got older, I recognized that like, Jesus, fuck, like this holiday. To me, I mean, honestly, the thing that now that I think about it, what really burned me out on Christmas is as I got older and I was expected to like buy gifts for people.
Yes.
And not having any money, like literally no money to buy a gift for myself throughout the entire year. Right. And so just as soon as I started having to pay for it, I think I realized that Christmas was something that put a lot of pressure on people. And watching people in my life, especially my brothers, as they got older and had kids and they didn't have money, and they felt like enormous pressure to get presents for their kids. And like basically like the presents are the love, the presents are Christmas. Even though the message from like the Christmas Carol and all the shit we watch is like, gifts don't matter, material things don't matter. Christmas is about being together and family. I always felt that as bullshit. I always felt that as like, no, the presents matter. And that part of it is what burned me out when I was younger.
Yes, definitely the present giving and the enormous stress. Yes, exactly. When I lived uptown, I lived near Andersonville, which had this, sort of this store that specialized in the sorts of things you buy for Christmas, candles, tchotchkes, all of that. And I remember watching people just the way they talked about the presents, well, okay, so we spent $250 and that's good. And this many presents. And so that was part of the violence, but also
like a wedding.
Yes,
like
exactly.
how much do I love this person?
Right.
And I'll measure that by like how much I spend on their dumb gift.
Right, exactly. And then there was the whole, the brutality also comes, I think, from just this sense that you must be happy and you must celebrate. And it just seemed that a lot of people were actually completely miserable. It reminded me of Thanksgiving in some ways. I was always, when I first came here, my American friends would insist on inviting me. I think I've told you or someone else about this. They would invite me to Thanksgiving, which was lovely and very charming, and everyone was absolutely delightful. It was also very clear, and they were clear to me about it. You're going to be the buffer. You're the foreigner. I'm bringing 2 family gatherings, and I'm going to, you can't be rude to me because I've got this friend here. And she is not only is she outside the family, she's outside the country. So you can't, so you have to be on your best behavior to me. So, and I noticed that sort of weird family dynamic during Christmas as well. And so there's that weird brutality around family and love and what it means. And it just seems like Christmas, even as much as, or perhaps more so than Thanksgiving, just drips with familial angst.
Yes.
It's always dredging up crap. And like you said, your siblings not feeling terrible about that's a horrible way to be.
Yeah.
That's a terrible society and system then, which is not to say that upper class Indians are not like that. Trust me, I know.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of angst, but it's also the way it's kind of relayed through Christmas is interesting. And especially because there's so much hypocrisy around. I feel like Christmas is also brings out so much hypocrisy. It's such a deeply hypocritical time of year because it makes everyone say things like, let's all be kind to each other.
Yes.
Like, what the fuck are you talking about? When, first of all, the world is just grinding us down. And secondly, the fact that you feel compelled to say that over and over again tells me that you're having a really hard time being kind to anyone.
Right. Yeah. There's like, why the need for this? And you're right. Beyond the gift giving, there's a pressure to like perform what a family is on Christmas. And that like, if anything goes wrong on that day, it carries like an extra like heavy weight because something went wrong on Christmas. I'll never forget this happening on Christmas because there is this like, it is tied to that hypocrisy because it feels like one day a year we'll act like we all like each other. Right. When the rest of the year it's fuck you.
Yeah. It's a weird time. It's a weird time. And I just take it as an occasion. If I'm not with friends, I'll cook a nice meal for myself.
Yeah, I was wondering, like,
That's what I do.
you had mentioned, like, I don't know, and I think this gets us to The Apartment, actually, because we both have been thinking about and watching this film, The Apartment, starring Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. This is another Billy Wilder film. For those that are doing the Nostalgia Trap Movie Club, we watched Ace in the Hole last week. So Billy Wilder in 1960 makes this film called The Apartment, which is a movie about a guy who's sort of like a bachelor in New York, who is trying to climb his way up the ladder of some insurance office, like a Mad Men style office in Manhattan. And he's climbing the ladder by giving the key to his apartment to the executives so that they can have extramarital affairs in his apartment. And then, he meets someone he falls in love with, the elevator girl, Shirley MacLaine, and the plot goes from there. But it is a lot about family, and it is weirdly, there's Christmas like plays a role in this movie as the like family thing. I thought that was interesting.
It is the most depressing film I've ever watched. I would say it's the most depressing film I've ever watched that's actually billed in some ways as a comedy.
Yeah.
And there's nothing comic. I kept trying to see, okay, am I supposed to laugh here? Am I supposed to laugh there? It is so depressing. But yes, he basically runs a kind of brothel, which is not to slut shame anyone or anything, but it is what it is. It's essentially a brothel. And I think the last time you and I spoke about The Apartment was during our housing episode.
That's right. Yep.
And we used that as an example of a time where you could actually live in New York and be a renter. And the shift in the housing market actually came about sometime, I think, in the mid 50s. So by 1960s, the country is slowly moving towards the idea of home ownership as the ideal and and what everyone should aspire to. But in this time, in this movie, we're still in a stage where a certain class of people, like workers employees at an insurance company, are renting, and he happens to rent in a rather nice part of New York, as I recall. I forget the address he gives.
It's on 67th Street, and he actually, right at the beginning of the movie, he actually names the numbers. He like says how much he makes, which is $94. He says $94 a week, and that his rent is $80 a month, but his rent went up $5 because they put an air conditioner in. And I'm like, Jesus Christ! I'm thinking about like the percentages of like his income, that what his rent is. It's significantly different than it is today. I mean, when you think about Upper West Side, I mean, it's fucking impossible to live there.
You could not be getting away with just that amount of your salary going towards rent.
Right.
Exactly. Absolutely. So that's something, we had discussed. And right, it is, you forget it's about Christmas until you come to the Christmas party in the office.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me because I just started rewatching Mad Men, which I love. I think Mad Men is just,
I love
genius,
it too.
Genius, absolute genius. And Mad Men is about around 1966, 67, I think is when it's set. And this is actually looking at the era that Mad Men represents, but it's within that time period. So there's a different kind of reality there. And it's in black and white, and there's that super depressing and yet supposedly fun-filled office party. And I can only think about Mad Men and those scenes where the men run after the secretaries and then throw up their dresses, and they talk about the tangerine panties that one of them wears, etc. So all of that is in The Apartment, and you don't realize until a while. Because I remember when you said it's a Christmas movie, and I said, "Huh?" And I realized, oh yes, that's true. It's set around Christmas, right? It goes from, I think, Christmas to New Year, and New Year's. And his boss is someone who, like Don Draper, lives outside the city with his family in this sort of
White Plains.
White Plains.
He's always going to the 714 train to White Plains, no matter what happens with his mistress.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So that, but I just found it, and I'll stop repeating myself, but I found it depressing because not just because it was in black and white, which is fine. I mean, so many of Wilder's, I'm thinking about all those Marilyn Monroe movies, they're all black and white, but there's just something also just dark about this. The lighting, the apartment is dark. There is not a single scene, as I recall, except the early part of the Christmas party where you see the scene outside the window and it's clearly, a painted scene. That's the only time you see anything resembling daylight.
That's right. Yeah.
The
It's a nighttime movie.
Yeah, the entire movie is shot at night, and it's dark, and it's New York around Christmas time.
Mhm.
And but none of
And look what we're watching happening. Like what we're watching happening is not a nostalgic. This isn't a Frank Capra film where we learn something about the characters and they come together in like a heartwarming family scene. Instead, it seems like the whole movie, and that's why I like Billy Wilder. Is someone that said in the movie club that Billy Wilder like basically was like this immigrant whose family was killed in the Holocaust, who comes to the United States and makes movies that are like, here's America. And it's like sort of the immigrant view of America. And I felt like that's what I like about The Apartment is it as a Christmas film, it didn't like hold your hand and think there's any warmth here. Instead, we're just looking at people being really shitty to each other.
Completely
and almost like,
shitty to each other.
Yeah. And it's weird because it's like undermining the whole idea of family because it seems like every dude in this movie is cheating on his wife.
Every one of them is cheating, and everyone in this film, especially the men, they're all assholes. They're all throwing, they're all sort of exchanging the women as if they're just pieces of meat.
Yeah.
As if they're salami that you give as Christmas gifts, essentially, which is what they try to do with Shirley MacLaine's character.
They all want her. Yeah.
They all want her, and they talk about her in these really disgusting ways. And as a piece of meat. But also, it seems like the women are the only ones who are either sarcastic, like the boss's secretary, who, says, look, I was his thing 4 months ago or 4 years ago. And then before me, there was this, and before me, so-and-so. And then Shirley MacLaine's character, what is her name? Why can I not remember? She has a really interesting name.
I think it's like Cubelic or a Cuber. She's got a really, let me look it up.
People. We're going to talk about.
Yeah, because I was thinking that too. They say it a million times in the movie.
Right. And they call her Miss, and then they call her by her last name
it's
sometimes.
Cubelic. Or Cubelic.
Cubelic. And what's her first name? Vera.
Fran.
No, Fran. Her name is Fran.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's Baxter, CC Baxter.
Right,
right. I wanted to ask you too, like, what do you think of the Jack Lemmon character? Because he's the guy we're supposed to like, identify with the whole time. He's the good guy. He's a
schmuck.
He's the one good man in the movie, according to the movie's script. Right.
But he's such an ass. He's such a complete ass. Right. I mean, there he is standing in the cold under his apartment while waiting essentially for his bosses to stop fucking.
Yes.
That's really it's like the level of schmuckiness that this guy.
Well, he's like he's not fucking his way to the top, but he kind of is in a weird way. Right?
Exactly.
Like
in a way, yes.
He's using his power, and as a man, he can do that. Like the women don't really get the career bump out of this that he does.
No, none of them do. Right. I mean, because they're all just transients in these men's lives. The next secretary will come up, or the next. There's a Marilyn Monroe reference which is sort of interesting, where one of his bosses picks up a woman who sounds exactly, and she does a pretty good breathless impersonation of Marilyn Monroe, which kind of fades away after a little while. I think it's very hard to sustain, actually. That Marilyn Monroe breath,
hard to sustain for her too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And which is interesting given Wilder's, experiences with Monroe.
Yeah.
But all of these women are the only ones who are sort of in some ways perhaps puncturing the men's ideas about who they are. They reveal things about the men, but the men are all horrible human beings. And in many ways, I think the Jack Lemmon person is also horrible. And MacLaine's character has this kind of purity about her. And her face is, I know you're not supposed to reference people's looks perhaps anymore, but she is exquisitely beautiful in this movie.
I really haven't seen a lot of Shirley. I mean, Shirley MacLaine to me is like Warren Beatty's older sister.
That's just it. That's how we think about her. And this person who, goes on about past lives, etc. So she has a particular persona as the older.
Right.
Shirley
She's
MacLaine.
super cute in this movie, though.
She really is.
You know what's weird? I wonder what you think of this, thinking about like queerness and thinking about family and stuff like that. What's really weird is that like the women that are the mistresses, they're like heartbroken. Mrs. Olsen, the secretary, or Miss Olsen, the secretary, they're all
Yes, yes.
they're heartbroken that these men won't leave their wives and marry them. And like that's really interesting because they're sitting here being like, this guy's a philanderer. He's cheating on his wife with me, but I want to be in that position. Like I want to be the wife. And like that even seems to be the end turn of the movie. I mean, spoiler alert,
Mhm.
Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine get together at the end, and you assume that they're going to get married and keep house together, which is kind of weird considering how much the film undermines that idea the whole time.
And it also is weird because there's no real romance between them. There's no affection between them,
Not at
really.
all.
And in fact, again, spoiler alert, the reason that they even, in a way, quote unquote, get together is because she ends up in the apartment because his boss brings her to the apartment. And when she finds out that the boss isn't going to leave her, she tries to commit suicide, which is how she ends up in his apartment, sort of comatose on his bed. And he has to kick out the other woman whom he's brought in. And I mean, there's this whole, I guess that's kind of the sort of slapsticky quality to the film. But then it's actually one of the reviews I was looking at. And by the way, I really don't understand why the reviews all go on about how this is the greatest comedy. But I guess they mean it in a particular way, perhaps. But one of the reviews points out, this is a film about suicide. This is a film about a woman trying to kill herself.
Yeah.
And there's no affection between them. And in the end, of course, she literally flies to sort of towards him. There's a scene of her rushing towards him on the street. And it's, it's Billy Wilder. So one wants to sort of take it as a darkly cynical look at relationships.
Yes.
But I don't know. I mean, I just
because it's kind of heartwarming at the end. I was like, oh, I got almost like a typical rom-com ending here where the two characters look at each other knowingly and you realize everything in the script has kind of perfectly created this moment where they realize they're just right for each other. But it's a rational decision. It's not something that's based on any kind of sentiment or love. Like throughout the movie, Jack Lemmon is giving arguments as to why he would be the ideal partner for her.
And he doesn't tell her.
Right.
I mean, he goes to his boss, right? There's a moment where he goes to his boss and he says, well, she doesn't know this yet, but I'm in love with her and I'm going to tell her. Like, dude, can you at least tell the woman you're in love with that you have, and he's basically staking a claim on her as if planting a flag on her heart. And then, of course, he gets surprised because the boss then reveals blah, blah, blah. It's all it's bizarre. So I want to think of it as perhaps an indictment of romance, but I don't know. I mostly, honestly, I was so depressed after watching this movie. I had to watch 2 episodes or 3 episodes of Absolutely Fabulous. And then I watched The Trouble with Harry, which is actually Shirley MacLaine's first movie with Alfred Hitchcock, just to have a mind cleanse of sorts.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. It's funny you say that because while I was watching this, I was Hollywood comedies that are like the best, like the prestige Hollywood comedies, like the AFI are going to say these are the top 10 comedies of all time, are always movies that are super depressing and dark and aren't that funny. Like, like what they'll call comedy, because they won't put like crass comedies there, like they won't put stuff that's for lower people. Like they'll with like fart jokes and stuff like that. They need humor that's like Wes Anderson, Woody Allen, like we think hard about our comedy and we laugh. We think hard about each joke and we chuckle once we understand it. There's something about that because I feel like The Apartment definitely falls into that category. On the other element I was going to say about Christmas is that, there's this whole dumb Twitter conversation about like, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? And that sort of thing. But I'm thinking about like, what's the difference between we really mean when we say Christmas movie? Because there are lots of movies that take place during Christmas. And then there are movies that are actual Christmas movies that are like supposed to like, I don't know, create some feeling. And it feels like I was thinking of Eyes Wide Shut actually when I was watching The Apartment, because
I saw your poll. Yes.
Yeah, both movies are about infidelity, and they're both using Christmas, it seems like, as a stand-in for family, which seems like what the easy way to think of Christmas is the perfection of the family in some way.
Right. I mean, and then of course there are these sort of Hallmark style Christmas movies, And
do you watch those? Have you seen any of those?
I saw the last one I saw was because I supposedly had to because it was queer. and was it on Hallmark? It's the one with the guy from Schitt's Creek, has a minor role, and it has the Twilight woman. What's her name?
Kristen Stewart.
Yes, it has Kristen Stewart playing a lesbian along with some other big names, and it's a Christmas movie that's all about how one of them doesn't want to come out to her parents, and so of course, blah blah blah, heartwarming, blah blah blah. You can imagine the end, blah blah blah. Right. So, that's the last. What is it about wanting to? I don't know. It's about causing torture to ourselves over and over again. There's a weird way in which it seems like Christmas movies seem to help to constantly reiterate the idea that family is necessary.
Yeah.
And so maybe in that sense, The Apartment as a Christmas movie is actually blowing all of that up, because everything about family in this movie is horrible. For instance, she has this terrifying brother-in-law who's a cab driver. And honestly, every time, that guy is a really good actor, whoever he is, but every moment he was on screen, I really thought he was going to hit her. I mean, that he brings that sense of menace to the entire movie. And he does, in fact, hit. He does get a blow at Jack Lemmon, as I recall.
That's right. Yeah,
broken nose, etc. But he's filled with menace, and what he brings with him is the sense that she is really not tied to her family, but that she is caged within her family, because she has to constantly be in touch with her sister, and if she isn't in touch with her sister, her brother-in-law will be looking for her all over the city, and which is exactly what happens. Her brother-in-law even comes to her office building and demands to know what happened to her.
And he's identified as the outer borough ethnic dude with an accent,
with a leather jacket.
That's right.
Leather jackets are bad.
Yeah, and
leather jackets bad, suits good.
And it's just like Mad Men, actually. The way they portray the people in the city are the strivers, and then there's these sort of outer borough people who have always some sort of ethnic, Italian accent or Polish accent, and they represent something rougher. They represent violence. They represent the family. I mean, I don't know if you remember in Mad Men when Peggy leaves her house to go move to Manhattan, her mother says, "You'll get raped."
Yes.
Just literally and to me, that attitude, and knowing a lot of outer borough people and a lot of deep Brooklyn people, that sort of fear of the city, and the place where you meet people like Fred McMurray and the other assholes that are, it's really something that is really present in the city. I don't know if it would be in a movie today. It seems that outer borough ethnic character is very much mid-century.
Yeah, this is true. Now, of course, there's a kind of bland representation that just flattens every New Yorker out into one type.
Right.
And that one type is sort of upwardly mobile, somehow has a flat that they really shouldn't be able to afford. Very Carrie Bradshaw, speaking of.
That's right.
The whole Sex and the City reboot.
I already watched the reboot. Dude. Good Lord.
I know. I'm you just got worse. That was not possible, but you did it.
So why? It's funny that we're both sitting here being God, we both watched this awful Sex and the City thing, but we fucking pressed play on it. So why
My
is that?
excuse is that I'm a cultural critic, but that's not a good excuse.
I was morbidly curious. I'll say this:
Same
Sex and the City, because I think Sex and the City actually, you could call The Apartment Sex and the City, right?
Yes,
you could retitle the film, the Billy Wilder film, Sex and the City.
Yeah.
In part, I don't know. I watched Sex and the City at a very particular moment in my life in California when I was thinking about moving to New York City, and it really drew me to New York, which is really weird because I don't have anything in common socially or anything with these women on this show. And yet I felt like it was important to watch and that it represented some important cultural turn. I think it's weird to think of it as such a sex positive show because what was going on in the 90s and 2000s in the wider culture was so much more radical than what was going on Sex and the City. But either way, when the reboot came out last week, I was I gotta watch this. I don't know why. But I don't know. I think the show remains the show. It still feels like Sex and the City to me.
Yeah, it hasn't really changed. I think it's trying really hard. And I like what you said about Sex and the apartment and Sex and the City. That Sex and the City is essentially the apartment.
Yeah.
With women actually being able to actually have sex now. But then what do they do with that supposed power is, of course, the question that runs all through Sex and the City. And of course, as you point out, it was nothing like what was actually happening in the 90s, where people were reconfiguring sex and the city in really interesting ways, and also what was happening to the city itself in the 90s with Giuliani. And I don't recall how the series actually addressed any of that. It kind of addresses that through Miranda very quickly in a line about Giuliani and Times Square, I think, very quickly. But
well, the new Sex in the City is a lot woker than the old Sex in the City.
And it's so bad.
Yeah.
It's so woke and it's so bad. It's like they hired some 20-something who spends their entire life online, or actually more like they hired someone who actually has no idea how social media really plays out in real life and imagines that people actually talk like this, right?
Exactly.
That people actually use these phrases in their everyday conversation. It's really bizarre. It's a kind of a weird, calcified kind of version of what is reality, what is wokeness and what are people really talking about and how does gender, these really awkward, very manufactured phrases.
Totally phony.
At the end of the day, it just ages them even more because they're trying to stay relevant. And I'm like, no, you just seem much older than 50 because you are clearly no longer 4, but now 3 white women who have spent the last 20 years, all your lives, never actually having to talk to people of color, talk to anyone who's different, even cis white people. You've never had to talk to anyone but your own small crowd because you somehow were magically able to make money, for instance, writing a bloody column. That was back then, right? But you've never had to leave your bubble. And now you do, mainly because your audience won't stand for it otherwise. So now you've got this some weird social media advisor on your writing team, and it's completely artificial. And you don't know what sex really is even now.
No. And they're overcompensating with all the because there's Black characters on the show now. There's a a non-binary podcast host who's just there to like speak all that shit from Twitter. There's a scene that I screamed when Miranda comes out of the subway at Columbia in Harlem, and like the music all of a sudden had like this hip hop beat to it. It's like and like, oh, she's in the hip hop area now. And as soon as she gets on campus, she immediately misgenders someone. And the person says like, wow, quick with the pronouns. And you're sort of like,
no one.
I've been on a college campus for the last 25 years of my fucking life, and no one has ever said, wow, nice pronouns to me. Like, it's so fucking weird and dumb and like out of touch with anything. The idea that, there probably is a bunch of writers who go on Twitter and they're like, find what's hot on Instagram right now, and we'll write that into the script. And it's like, there's a difference between the way people talk online and the way people are in real life, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's the weird thing. And then of course her responses to her Black professor, all of that is so
my
stilted.
God. Yeah.
But again, it's totally weird and fake. I'm like, have you never met a Black professional woman with braids? That's kind of impossible. And then the way she apologizes for being the white lady out of touch, but the series gives her a chance to actually literally rescue the Black woman on the subway from that Chucky doll. By the way, Chucky.
There's a Chucky appearance.
Yes, exactly. We love Chucky, in case listeners are wondering.
And she's all talking. They're all talking.
Right.
That was excruciating because they're talking about the whole white savior thing. They're like, I mean, all of it's real meta. They're like having this conversation about race while they're enacting it. It's so bad.
And then she says, oh, so was that very white savior of me? Because she somehow gets to beat off the Chucky guy, who's actually trying to harass or steal from her Black professor. And in a weird way, that actually reaffirms the idea that, see, white women are good people. And they can, it's trying to be ironic, but it's actually being super serious. There's a real violence to that, frankly. There's a real violence in the way they twist and twist that white savior narrative so that it ultimately, like a Rubik's Cube, it comes back, to that position.
Yes. And Miranda is perfect for this because she's sort of like this well-meaning character that like even her old-fashionedness, because she like carries books instead of a Kindle. And that book actually comes in handy for beating off the Chucky guy because, and so it's like all this like sort of like it's speaking to, I think Sex and the City, at least the new version, is speaking to Miranda type characters that like have the, think of themselves as good people, but are also aware that they're a little behind and are earnestly trying. And it's like, is that where we're going to locate like, I don't know, white supremacy or sort of like that's the impulse, is just these kind of white characters who are sort of trying to do better. And I get so fucking
I encounter those women so often, and those are the worst. I prefer the blatant Karens to those women, because those women, the Miranda types, are far more insidious and far more harmful and far more difficult to deal with. Whereas, if there's some, I always tell you, right, that I practically grew up in Indiana, and I prefer the blatant open racism that I would encounter, because I could say, you're being racist, and they say, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. Okay, fine. And we move on. But with someone like a Miranda character, and I think you're absolutely right, that this is where the show is going to locate itself in terms of its resistance, supposedly, or in terms of its adaptability to modern times, is going to be, I think, you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be in the Miranda character, not in the Carrie character, who I don't know where she's going, and
I've never understood why we're supposed to care about Carrie Bradshaw. Like, she's the worst character on the show by far. Miranda was always the person. It's funny because I remember watching the show earlier, and Miranda was the person I identified with the most, if there was any of these women I identified with, because she was a person that seemed like she cared about, I don't know, social justice and things like that. And she also married Steve, who's like a regular working class type of dude. And she wasn't like pursuing people like Mr. Big or like pieces of shit like that. There was a cynicism about Miranda that I enjoyed. But now the new Miranda is like hyper woke Miranda, and it's really hard to watch.
I think the old Miranda would look at the new Miranda and slap her and say, what the fuck are you going on about? Shut up already. Stop being this person. And
well, she explains her revolution that she had is that she went to the airport when the Muslim ban happened, when Trump banned Muslims. I went to the airport at JFK and I worked with these lawyers from the ACLU, and I realized that was my cause. It's some real To Kill a Mockingbird shit.
Yes, it really is. As a law professor says in a flyaway line. Yes, that's right. To Kill a Mockingbird shit. No, it is awful. And Big is awful, but who's the big in the apartment is also in a way, all the men in the apartment are sort of perhaps less suave versions of Mr. Big, because the old Big treated Carrie like shit. And it was only when I started watching the old series again a couple of days ago, just to refresh my memory, that I realized he was an asshole to her from the start. And someone on Twitter, I think it was Andy Zeisler, who had said that. And I went back and I thought, yes, he treated her like crap from day one, right? He shows up on their first date, for instance, with another man, this toxic asshole Englishman. That's
right. Yes.
Who then goes looking for another woman. He's been a jerk. And I was so glad when he died. I said, yes, die. We're done with you for once and for all. We're done.
Yeah, you're right. Mr. Big is a character who's kind of like, what is the show giving us when it's giving us this as the idealized dude? Because he's the Fred McMurray character in The Apartment. And I wonder what you think about that, Yasmin, like in terms of like The Apartment, like it's sort of like a hashtag Me Too type of movie, because it's really about like workplace violence and workplace harassment and sexuality. But I'm wondering what it has to say about all that stuff, because it's like from so many decades before Me Too or any of that.
It is, and it is interesting. The more we talk about The Apartment, the more I appreciate it, David, because I'm beginning to realize that yes, The Apartment does not in any way valorize the Fred McMurray character or any of the men. No, all of them are
they're horrible.
Yes, absolutely, and it actually points to McMurray's, for instance, absolute hypocrisy, as for instance, when he's sitting in the restaurant, in the Chinese restaurant,
right,
and delivering his usual spiel to her about how much he loves her, and which is when, and then they do that again at the end, which is when she just runs away from him. And I think my problem with the ending is that she runs away from Fred McMurray, yes, but then she moves towards another character with whom she doesn't really have a relationship, and it's as empty as what she had with her boss. But you're right. I mean, and then I think what's really important in terms of, yes, Me Too, absolutely, the sexual harassment, I think the ways in which the men talk about the women, Billy Wilder has his way of kind of distancing, even visually, right? Like he visually distances himself from them, and you can see them not close up or intimate, but as, look at these characters, look at how horrible they are. So, you have all of them discussing whether it's the elevator girl or any other woman, though every time Billy Wilder sort of distances himself, takes a few steps back, and you get the sense that he's actually commenting on that rather than sympathizing. And it's really cleverly done. But then also, I think what's really interesting is that scene on Christmas Day with Fred McMurray and his family and his child picking up the phone, for instance, and this conversation he has with the kid, because the kid wants to set off one of his toy spaceships, and perhaps with a bug in it so that they might propagate.
That's
and
right.
McMurray
What a
says,
weird little scene. Yeah.
It is weird. I was like looking at it and thinking, what is this about? And McMurray, for some reason, is startled by the word propagate. It's not, I think, because he doesn't know what the word means. And he's startled by it emerging from his child's mouth, and probably realizing also there's something there in the background of his own life about propagation. And the child says, yes, so that they can propagate, have more bugs. And then his wife comes down the stairs as he's taking a phone call about his lover having committed suicide. And then again, Wilder sort of takes a few steps back, and you watch McMurray say, well, no, well, is she all right? Okay. Do you need money? Keep her there.
Mm-hmm.
Don't, in other words, I don't really care that she tried to kill herself. I just care that no one find out about it. And if you need any money to help cover it up,
it's a monstrous scene, honestly. Like, you realize, you're right. Like, another director would have made McMurray's character more sympathetic. You might understand that this guy, he's kind of, he's having an affair, but he's kind of caught in a bad situation. Instead, we see McMurray as just an absolutely calculating psychopath who's like, expresses no care whatsoever for the woman having committed suicide or attempted suicide because of him. Like, literally, he created this entire situation, and he's like, his attitude is like, don't bother me on Christmas, basically.
Right. And it's all shot against that family living room and the staircase. This
in another movie, The Ideal Space.
Exactly. And it is, in fact, the ideal space in their family postcard. Because it's a postcard, right? He sends a postcard of all of them in that living room to Jack Lemmon, who then sees it as a sign that he's now almost buddy with his boss. Look at this. And he shows it to her, I think. He says, look, I have a Christmas card from him. He's a great guy. We know each other really well, etc. So the way that the living room even becomes literally a symbol of the rot at the heart of the American family, the heart, especially the suburban family, but all families. It doesn't seem like anyone has a family worth really holding on to. I mean, certainly her family is just oppressive. It's clearly about controlling her and also controlling her sexuality.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, what do you think of the neighbors? Like, there's the doctor and like the neighbor and the
immigrant doctor.
Yeah, and the immigrant landlady too. There's lots of accents, like New York accents in this movie, but like they're all know what's going on with him, or at least the version that he's given them. They think that he's like a ladies' man, like bringing back all these girls to have sex with them in his apartment all the time. And there's a great line, because like it's clearly like a Jewish doctor next door who tells him that you should stop all this and be a mensch.
Yes.
And he's like, what's a mensch? And he says, a human being. And that line actually comes back. Yes. And I thought, like, isn't that interesting? That because I'm thinking, like, what is this film indicting? Like, this film seems like it's a pretty heavy indictment, but I'm like, what is it indicting?
Right.
Because it's like the other people seem to like be kind of the other people in the apartment building are sort of like intrigued and in a funny way about his bachelor life, but they also seem to think it's a danger for him.
Right. The use of Yiddish is really interesting. Even at the very, I think one of either the first or the second scene where I think his landlady walks up and Michigas. That's the
right.
word she uses,
Yeah,
right? So that right there, you get a sense that there's something going on there with his. He's not a WASP, but he's probably some white guy from Ohio. I don't know what what his origin story is, but and having to deal with. Yes, you're right. The entire building, other than him, so far as we see, is composed of immigrant families, and also quite possibly, given that they are Jewish and the doctor, for instance, is what, maybe in his 50s. It's hard to tell because, but so probably either escaped the Holocaust or at least knows about it, but certainly had some visceral experience given the strong accents that they both speak with, both he and his wife.
Yeah.
So that's also kind of, Wilder's own biography, kind of present in this film in a really interesting way. And the doctor saving lives. It's really interesting the way the doctor inserts himself into that, not quite inserts himself, but appears in this narrative as a savior, literally, because he physically actually rescues Shirley MacLaine's character from absolute death. But also the slapping scene.
Isn't that crazy?
It was a weird scene. And then you see Jack Lemmon's character kind of wincing. The camera shoots over to him and you see him wincing.
I was thinking about Pulp Fiction while I was watching that, like plunging the knife into or the needle into Uma Thurman's chest and the ODing scene. But again, I was also thinking of Eyes Wide Shut, because there's a scene in that movie where there's a woman who's ODing and Sidney Pollack has to bring Tom Cruise in to revive her and bring her back to life. And it's like, these men have fucked these women to near death. Like that's like literally we've drugged and fucked these women to near death, and we need people to come help us rescue them and bring them back to life. There's something really fucking disturbing about it.
Was weird. That scene was so weird, and I think it got weirder when the slap was off screen.
Yes, it continues. I was like, how many fucking times is this guy gonna slap her? Yeah,
she's awake for fuck's sake. She's awake. You can stop now. But that it continued off screen lent it a brutality to all of that, and that was weird and interesting. And yes, and then she revives, and then she spends a day or something, and then there are those scenes of his sort of solitary bachelor life, because he uses a tennis racket as a colander for spaghetti.
There's the comedy. There's the funny part.
Right. I guess. Yeah. I just saw it as this is all rather sad, but again, it's also the stereotype, right, but again, the solitary bachelor, the solitary het bachelor, more importantly, the hetero bachelor who doesn't know how to cook. Because I'm also thinking about the Odd Couple movie.
Speaking of Jack Lemmon, right?
Yes, which was also incredibly depressing, which surprised me, because I remember watching it and thinking, oh, this is going to be funny, because I had watched the TV series. And the TV series is, silly but funny. And the Odd Couple movie is not.
Yeah.
It is super depressing in the same way that this movie is. And there's just something about the bachelor who eats TV dinners and who uses a tennis racket as a colander. And it's supposed to be funny, yes, but it's also not funny. I don't know.
It seems like we can also, like, he has to be kind of sexless. Like he's a bachelor, but we don't see him like having sex with all these women. Like what makes him good in the movie is that he's not. He says at some point, like, I'm a real sex pot. All my neighbors know, but he doesn't even have sex with that woman. And that seems like pretty key. Is that this guy is sort of like a eunuch bachelor, and that part of it is why we like him.
And the woman whom he brings home and who mockingly refers to him as a sex spot at the end because he doesn't have sex with her.
Right.
That's another weird backstory, right? Because she meets him at a bar and then she tells him her whole story, which is a weird story about her husband is in Cuba and imprisoned, and
with
then
Castro.
with Castro. And then she's walking up the stairs to his apartment and she's talking about how cute her husband is. He's only 5 feet tall and he's adorable. And I'm just sitting there tearing my hair out, thinking, what is going on here? Now we have Cuba and Castro, and this strange woman, basically, she doesn't even hide the fact that she's married, right? She's basically saying, my husband is imprisoned in Cuba and I'm really horny. Would you like to fuck me?
Right.
That's the message, which is fantastic. And she's completely liberated in her own way, actually.
This movie pissed people off, I think, because of exactly that. When this movie came out in 1960, a lot of people, a lot of critics and audiences thought it was like a filthy movie and that its subject matter was too lurid. And I can see that in some ways. It's sort of like a film that you met. I think they're identifying what you're identifying, which is sort of like the depressing element of the movie, just because it has such a bleak vision of like anything like love. I mean, like you said, the characters get together at the end, but it isn't a love story. You're sort of like, well, they've found a way to navigate all this bullshit, like they've found a way, but you almost think that this cycle is just going to repeat itself, and Baxter's going to work himself into an executive position, and Baxter's going to be eventually borrowing someone else's apartment to screw his mistress. And it seems like even though Baxter is someone who we appreciate as maybe different from those other guys, the film doesn't give us a lot of like great models.
No, and they give us really indifferent choices, right? So, which is exactly what happens with Carrie and Big.
Yeah, right.
There's no love there. This is a guy who treats a woman like an asshole all the way into the 2000s, which is a long way to go into being such an asshole. He acts more like someone who belongs in the 1980s, one of those Michael Douglas thrillers, right? Yep. But he's somehow retooled for the aughts, as it were. And that's a bad choice as well. And it's a choice that Carrie feels that she just has to make because, well, how would you give up someone like Big? Which, of course, ignores the fact that perhaps a major reason, right, for Carrie to turn to Big constantly is the fact that he offers her that magnificent closet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's really what that relationship is about.
When she falls into Miranda's arms after Big dies and says, "What am I gonna do?" I thought to myself, what she means by that is how am I going to live this fantastic life now?
Right.
Because when she comes home, she comes home and says, like, "How was your day?" to like Mr. Big in the new episode or the new season. And he says, "Oh, well, the Dow is up." And it's sort of like, are we really like saying that like this fucking like stockbroker, Michael Douglas, Wall Street ass character from the 80s is the ideal man? They had to kill him off, honestly, because he's so old fashioned. No, I mean, he really is the character from The Apartment.
Right. No, he really is. And then, so what choices is a young woman? And I was also thinking about Fran, right? Yes. Fran's choices in life. And I was thinking about the fact that she is apparently the best elevator operator. And for listeners who are not aware, this harks back. This is a day and time when you actually could not operate an elevator with just buttons. You did have to have a person turning a wheel of sorts, actually, and it was dangerous to operate it on your own. So elevator operators were a big thing, especially in these large luxury sort of office buildings. And so there she is in her uniform, and she's extraordinarily pretty, and she's got these white gloves on with which she touches. Who can blame her, right? So she touches all the buttons and everything only with her gloves on. And she's the best elevator operator, and she's also treated as a piece of meat. And I kept wondering, like, how much does she make, right? How much is she making? She has to live with her sister and her brother-in-law, both of whom are obviously, yes, they're giving her a place to live in, perhaps, but they are obviously also extraordinarily controlling. So she can't afford a place on her own.
That makes me think. One of the guys says, "What's with you dames always living out in the Bronx?" And
yes.
Sort of like all these working class women that were fucking in this office. Right. You never live in Manhattan. That's why they have to borrow his apartment.
Right. Yeah. So all of that, the economics of all of this. So what is she running towards in the end? She's running towards a guy with an apartment. That's the closet. That's the closet in the city. Yep. In the city and on the Upper West Side, right? So I always forget which is the best part? Is it the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side? I could never. What is it?
That's a question for an entire episode.
Right. Okay. We'll watch
The Upper
movies
West
about
Side
that.
is much more
Old.
no, Upper East
No?
Side is the old money.
Old one. Okay,
Upper West
sorry.
Side I think of as like, the progressive liberals.
I
That's
see.
Upper West Side is where Miranda lives. Actually, I think they
I
live in
see.
Brooklyn on the show, but a Miranda type character would definitely live on the Upper West Side.
Right. Okay. Got it. I've never been able to figure out which one is the Tony old money place. So that's the Upper East Side. Okay.
Well, I mean, a lot of the reviews, it's interesting. A lot of the reviews I read of the apartment mentioned like gentrification and how much has changed in the city since 1960.
For sure.
And, yeah.
For sure.
It seems like it almost feels like, as much as people say, oh, New York and the cities have changed since the 70s and 80s, but actually it feels like even earlier than that. Like the whole like West Side Story. There's another.
This is true. Right.
But it's amazing because they're sort of like lamenting the loss of exactly the world that the apartment is sort of showing. All right, we got to go, Yasmin. But I have one more thing for you. Because I did want to talk about Christmas music. Or just like Christmas itself. Do you have any love for Christmas? Do you have any do you have to want? Because I say this because I brought up to KJ on the show last week that my dream in life, I have many dreams, but one of them would be like to run a Christmas themed bar where it's just like Christmas decorations, music. We do New Year's at midnight every night. We do the Auld Lang Syne. And to me, there's something really like intense about that. And it's like, like TGI Friday, but I would call it TGI Christmas, I guess. That when you're here, it's Christmas. There's something like really horrifying to me about it, but also like I'm being tongue in cheek, but also like, I don't know, really appealing to it. To me, like I can still tap into that warm feeling about Christmas. And music is probably the number one thing that does it. I mean, my wife, she has to put up with me whistling Christmas tunes like in July because they just are stuck in my head forever. I'm already like chestnuts roasting, all that shit like really gets me, and I don't, and not on a conscious level. It's like something I don't have any choice in this. In other words, I wonder if you respond to any of that shit.
Very dear friends of mine love Christmas. One of my friends, for instance, Kay, is that's their favorite season next to Thanksgiving, I think, and they're not, and I think that all kinds of people do have a fondness and affection for Christmas. I have a fondness and affection for just this general sense of quote unquote joy in the air. I'm not.
You have such a hard time saying that.
I know, right?
Does it make
joy.
Does it make you a bad leftist to like Christmas?
Right,
I think that's the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't think it does. And as far as Christmas music is concerned, I'm actually not attached to any of the Christmas music I hear in America, mostly perhaps because I didn't grow up with it. Right. You might be surprised to know this, but I used to sing in the choir. This is what you do when you go to an Anglican school. You sing hymns every morning. And I was part of the choir. I was desk cat. And my favorite song is actually Amazing Grace. So I don't think I don't know if that's Christmas necessarily. But there is a way in which I, as an atheist and a Marxist and all of that, I always still find Amazing Grace to be, with all its, I know, problematic history, blah, 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 but I still find it to be incredible.
That's the problem. That's the thing. Is like the problematic history is like right there, and I'm like the first person to point it out. Yet the song comes on and a tear comes to my eye,
Absolutely.
and I'm like, fuck.
And I think that's okay. I think it's okay for us all to be on the left and to really look at a film like The Apartment and to also think about it in relation to other narratives. It obviously has a history with like Sex and the City. And I think it's okay for us to be analytical about all of that, be suspicious about all of that, and then also to go back home or stay at home, however one deals with home these days.
Yes.
And to actually enjoy the season, in or out of season even. I think all of that is fine. I think the left would do a lot better if it just learned to take that it's okay to take pleasure in supposedly problematic things and also be just aware. That's it.
Yeah, I mean the left needs a Christmas, if that makes sense. Yes. I mean, you and we did that talk a few months ago about grief and trauma and death, and one of the things that I took from that conversation that I think other people noticed too is this sort of like something we were highlighting is the lack of real meaningful rituals, to sort of like kind of give us an idea of where we belong and what all this means. And it seems like Christmas functions like that for people, but in a really like fake way. I'm just imagining like, God, what would like a left Christmas, or not even Christmas, but something as powerful as that, a cultural set of rituals where people hear that and they're stirred. I know that the left has its union songs, and there's, a few things that like people will sing that stir them. But the left needs a culture, and
it
like,
really does.
Yeah. And that's
like
what, I guess that's what I'm saying.
I like that. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I would also argue, let's all start to rehabilitate Christmas fruitcake, which has a really bad rap in this country. If you make it right, it's delicious. Nahom's included.
my dad will back you up on that. He's a huge fruitcake fan, and all of us are always like, what the fuck? But as I get older, a bunch of fruit packed together with a bunch of booze into a sweet, sticky mess, I can get down with that. The left needs a fruitcake.
The left.
Thank you, Yasmin. It's always fun talking with you. And thank you for letting me know about The Apartment, a movie that I watched twice and I'll probably watch in the future. It is depressing. It is like it's a movie that, God, Wilder packed a lot of fucked up shit in his movies.
And thank you for having this conversation, because I think if I hadn't had this conversation with you, I would go to my funeral pyre hating the apartment. Right. Speaking of rituals, I would die hating The Apartment, but I think I'm actually going to watch it again, because I realize now, after talking to you, it is a damned rich film. Thank you.
Yeah,
David.
It's a dirty, evil little movie. And watch Ace in the Hole too. It's on Criterion Channel and Amazon streaming right now. It's seriously, I cannot believe the movie was even made, honestly, in 1951. It's incredibly dark. All right, we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, all right. That is going to wrap up our very special Nostalgia Trap Christmas episode. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Go check out Yasmin's stuff at yasminnair.com. Go check out the Nostalgia Trap Patreon at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Have yourself a merry little Christmas, and we'll talk to you very soon. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.